You must be careful about the words you use, or the words you allow to be used in your house. Words are things. You must be careful. Careful about calling people out of their names, using racial pejoratives and sexual pejoratives and all that ignorance. Don't do that.
It's time to talk about it.
Pull up a chair and take a seat.
We're serving up recipes for life.
With Hampton University's Dr. Richard Mason and Dr. Tamara Williams.
Welcome to the Sunday Brunch.
This is Dr. Tamara Williams.
And this is Dr. Richard Mason. And welcome back to the table for another edition of Sunday Brunch with the Good Doctors.
The good doctors.
Hey, how's your week been?
It's been a great week, bro. It's been a great week. I have zero complaints. Zero complaints because it's not even worth complaining. I'm just more in the mindset this year of like, we said we're going to do something about it. So I don't want to talk about it anymore. I want to be more about it.
All right.
So I've been having a great week. Now you have to ask the people around me if their week has been as great. With my new determinations. But I feel pretty good about it. How's your week been?
Listen, these weeks are going to be weekend. That's all I'm going to say. They're going to week and do what they do. And guess what? I'm going to do what I do. That's all. That's the only way I know how to live. You know,
that's all we can do. That's all we can do. You know, I always laugh if anybody says, are you trying to be like anybody else? Like, that is such a waste of time. It's so much better to just be yourself because that's all you really know how to do. And some of us struggle just to do that.
Listen, that's it. I can't be anybody else but me, you know? And at the end of the day, like me or love me, my world gonna continue to move with or without you.
We could have a whole show just on that alone. Just on that alone. I wish that same mindset for everybody out there to know that they are already enough. And to already understand that we are all different and we don't have to be like everybody else. It was never required. And life would be so boring if we were. It would be so boring if we were all the same because we just are not.
Exactly. And you can't live your life to be something or someone else, you know, because at the end of the day, you are not going to be satisfied. You're not going to be happy with who you are. And that's important, you know, because I'm not going to walk around and feel some kind of way and be sad and depressed and everything else just to make someone else happy. You know, so that's the reality, is to talk through these things and really work through and understand who you are and set some personal goals and live your life. We just say live on top of the world. That's it. You know, that's the way I'm going to live.
Look, I don't know if I want to be on top, the side. I don't know sometimes. I'm going to be honest. But what I do know is that I don't want anybody else to tell me where they want me to be. I just know that I want to find my own place and be comfortable where I am. And I recognize that, like, I always talk about as I age, because every day we live, we're aging. Like every day, every moment, we're 1 second, one moment older and hopefully wiser. And as I've aged, I've come to learn that life, and literally the life that I have left, is too short to be concerned about how other people feel about me specifically. When I feel like I'm doing my thing or walking in my purpose. And I don't feel like I need to fit in anybody else's shape or box to make them feel comfortable about themselves concerning me. And it took a while to get there. I won't pretend like I woke up out of my mother's womb that way. Like, even though I am courageous because my mother encouraged me. But I am also a part of the learning that has happened as we age. When you know better, like we say every week, you do better. Or at least you should. And as we develop, we always talk about mental health. We're always talking about how self-care is not selfish and that it's really important to know your stuff. We always talk about therapy too, and the importance of people utilizing that great tool of therapy and finding the right therapist, because all of that can make the difference in just being comfortable enough to exist in the world and show up in the world as yourself.
Exactly.
As yourself.
And that's all I want to do. I want to make sure I meet people in their authentic space and who they are, you know, because that's the way I choose to live. And I know it takes people, time to get to that space because of some of the things that they've experienced. One of the areas I work in is dealing with trauma. And so you just never know what has caused trauma with someone and why they're not okay living in the space that they should be in or could be in. So it's a matter of accepting them in their space that they are in at the moment in time, but accepting them once they move to that safe space for them.
Yeah. And change and evolve. And evolve. I tell my students all the time, even my freshman students, I said, when you come back after that first semester, do you feel like you've evolved or you changed at all? And if they say no, I'm saying you need to keep working. If they say yes, and I said, because you're supposed to. When you go home, the people say they don't recognize you or you're acting differently. And they say, yes, they say you changed, I'm acting differently. I'm like, well, tell them they should too. Step it up too, because that's just a part of life. If you're the same person that you were 5 years ago, you're really not growing, you're not evolving, you're not changing. You're kind of stagnant. And I think that even counts for our emotional intelligence. Like that should continue to grow how we understand ourselves and how we feel the most comfortable showing up in the world.
Exactly. And just because somebody else is uncomfortable, that doesn't mean that you need to adjust your sail. That's all it is to it. But in the meantime,
can agree to disagree for sure.
Exactly. I'm going to run over to this buffet because
I see you ready to eat. I'm not even mad at you. While you go and grab food, I'm going to introduce our guests. We have quite the show today. We have quite the guest today. I am so excited to finally have this conversation with this guest. I've been wanting to have this conversation for some time, but I think this is a good time. It's God's time, and I'm good with it. So I want to welcome to the table for the first time, like I say often, it may not be the last time, for sure.
All right.
One of my favorites. If I say favorite online, I know some people be real hot. So one of my favorite former students, has really, he inspired me while he was in my classroom, but he has really inspired me and you see his face, he's like, what? I didn't know I did that. Yes, he inspired me while he was in my classroom, but he's definitely inspired me how he's continued to live his life. And in truth and honesty and transparency. I want to welcome to the table Demarius Newsom, Esquire. Esquire, yes. People, welcome back to your home by the sea, and definitely welcome to Sunday Brunch.
It is good to be back. It is good to be back.
Yeah. Welcome. And welcome to the table.
It's good to be at the table. Dr. Williams, I appreciate, I didn't know that I had inspired you in whatever ways that I did. Because just like you said, I'm one of your favorites, which is true. Folks can get mad about it. The truth is what the truth is, point blank, period.
It is what it is.
Right. As like I said, I'm saying one of your other favorites, my bestie, good old Dr. Justin Paul Preddy, but we'll figure out when we can get Justin back on home.
He is one of my favorites too, because I consider you guys to be twins. So when I see one, I often consider the other. And so they're, he goes along with that.
I mean, even back when we were on campus, like typically you saw me and you saw him. And when one of us was missing, the first question would be like, hey,
where's the other one?
All right. But look, before we get started, you got to tell people what class you're in. What's your class?
Well, let me go ahead and just do my good old Hampton introduction, which is still relevant, even out here in the big wide world beyond the home shores. So what's good people? My name is Demarius Newsom, Esquire. As they said, I am a 2015 graduate of the Hampton University, representing Ogre Phi Ogre 15. Post-Hampton, I'm also a 2018 graduate of the Emory University School of Law. I have been licensed to practice law here in the state of Georgia now for 6.5 years. Like six and a half years, specifying as a prosecutor. So I've been a prosecuting attorney for the past 6.5 years across 3 of the Metro Atlanta counties, across 4 different levels of court, handling a wide variety of different kind of legal issues. I always like to say that I'm one of the most unserious people with a very serious job. see. During my time at Hampton, I definitely spent 4 of my good years with the Hampton University Marching Force. Remember the saxophone section? Oh.
All right.
I sang with the Hampton University choir program through the university chorus, as well as through the concert choir, the Hampton University Equestrian Club. I'm a product not just of the psychology department, but also of the William R. Harvey Leadership Institute, the Dr. Freddie T. Davey Honors College. Let me get that right. God rest her soul. As well as one of the inaugural students for the Hampton University Pre-Law Institute. So I've done a whole lot of different things, but I still like to be outside and cut up.
All right. Let's hear.
So let's start there. Let's start there. So when he said he didn't know how he inspired me, let me just be transparent. He just ran down his bio. He didn't say what happened before Hampton. He talked about what he did from Hampton and what he's done since then. But what inspired me about him specifically was his drive in the midst of the trauma that he had experienced. So as a psychologist, I saw him show up every single day when I've seen other people refuse to show up in similar situations. I saw this young Black male swim. Not only did he swim, he taught swimming. He was a lifeguard at Hampton University. And I will never forget the day he said, Dr. Williams, I'm going to come to class and I'm going to be ashy from time to time, and I'm going to be coming right out the pool. He said, I'm even going to smell like chlorine, but I'm coming, Dr. Williams. I'm coming to class. I told him, I don't care what you smell or look like. The fact that you want to come to class, come get this information. And I'm pleased with that. And so what he inspired is while other people created excuses, he lost his mom at an early age. At a very early age, like younger siblings, a lot of adversity that would make other people tap out. He used that as an opportunity to tap in, and he didn't just tap in; he jumped all the way in. He tried to be a part of every single thing he could be a part of while he was at Hampton University, and he did it with joy.
And sometimes ashy. All right.
And he would listen.
But listen.
And smelled like chlorine.
That was a preemptive strike because he knew you would try to get him in class. What's wrong with you? You need some lotion. But see, I like that. You know?
And he sat in the front. And he didn't care. He sat right smack in the front of the class. And he did not care about that. He was focused when there was so many reasons to be unfocused. So that was the inspiring aspect. The fact that he said he wanted to go to law school. He made it. And he, was it always easy? I'm sure he will tell us that it was not. If it was easy, it wouldn't be right.
I mean, no, it wasn't. And growing up like in Meadville, Pennsylvania, which is it's a small town community. And as you're looking here at the palm of my hand, like the single freckle right here on the side literally represents all of the ethnic diversity of where I was from. So choosing to then go to Hampton, which was literally the largest collection of Black people I had ever seen in one
your whole life.
For my whole life. And honestly, it's still the same even now living in Metro Atlanta. But I remember growing up, my mother and my grandmother and my community and my siblings always pushed me to be my best. But at the same time, I always pushed myself to be my best. So even when I lost my mom when I was 16, which looking at my calendar, it'll actually be... Yeah, it'll be 16 years. Tuesday the 4th, which is an odd space to be in because I'm now the last of my siblings who have now lived half of my life without my mother. My sisters already had to come across this milestone, so it's going to be a little odd for me at that point in time. But the thing I'm always hearing in the back of my mind is my mom saying, "You can do it. Keep going. Keep pushing forward." And just like when I told my family at a young age, like I'm going to law school and this is what I'm doing. My family didn't say, well, you could do it this way or do it this way. They kind of just said this. Hey, we know that you're going to get it done because we know you. We're just waiting to watch it happen. So thinking about that and that being a kind of drive that I had, being as involved as I was even when I was in high school, as involved as I was even in college, it's an understanding that I'm not just a student. And even now, I'm not just a lawyer. So like during my 8 to 5, cool. I'm down to the DA's office doing what I need to do, otherwise protecting the citizens of Clayton County. But then outside of that, I've ended up joining a community band. I did a stage show back last year. I'm back in choirs. I'm heavily involved with my church. But I'm also still very involved. I'm very involved in making connections with like friends and other people that I've managed to find here in the city, as I've managed to also find myself in a different way. Like I credit my time at Hampton for being that space of, look, here's what it is. You are who you are, and you are who then you choose to be and what you then choose to do. And taking that same kind of angle to make sure that my life continues to do the singing when I leave from the home shores, that's literally something that's been like a major drive for me. But I'm grateful. I'm grateful to God.
Add in the extra part. Let the part that the listeners don't know. Not only did you lose your mother, but you grew up without your dad.
Whom I met at a later age, which I didn't meet him until like right on the eve of my law school graduation.
Exactly.
And in that situation, of course, I'm thinking it might be the worst case scenario, the absolute worst case scenario of, hey, I'm connected with my father. And then it's the, I want nothing to do with you. It's the, I don't want anything. Like my life is what it is and yours is what it is. My part is insignificant. And it's
Can you go back before you tell that part about how you found your dad?
Yeah, you got to give us the backstory.
I mean, he just jumped right into. I alluded to you grew up without your mother, only to that small part because your mother was a part of your life up to those 16 years, a significant part. But then, but you didn't have your father, so you were raised by your grandparents.
Yes. And my grandmother, whose birthday is today, happy birthday, Grandma.
Happy birthday, Grandma.
So with that, let's actually go ahead and back it on up. So it was National Margarita Day in February of 2018. I'm just going to back it up starting from there. So it's National Margarita Day. I'm out and about with my people. I wake up the next morning dealing with one of those very kind of savage hangovers. I can be candid with you, Dr. Williams. You know me. I was literally applying lotion while like cutting people down in class based upon my opinions. So I go ahead and keep it pushing. But I remember that morning, like something pricked me in my spirit, said, go look and see what you find. And in that moment, I was like, okay, I don't have much information really to build from because my mother didn't speak about my dad for whatever the reason. I don't know. It's water under the bridge now. But I remember when I found the information.
And you never asked? You said she didn't speak and you never asked?
When I was a kid, I would ask, and the answers that I got was just like, that's just what it is. And I remember I had a lot of resentment towards my father, not even knowing him for the majority of my life. But I think in that moment, the day after fighting through that hangover and searching and finding other information, I was in a space to receive whatever then the answers would be, knowing that I wouldn't have all the information because my mother would not be here to supplement. Knowing that. But I had to sit there with myself and think, I'm like, well, you have a couple options here. You could either do nothing and your life doesn't change. Your trajectory doesn't change. Your timeline doesn't really change, but you'll always know that there was a different path that you could have taken and you did it. On the flip side, it's like you could choose to take this path and you understand the possibility that it could potentially end up doing you more harm. Still, your life wouldn't change. Your trajectory would not change. But if you follow the second pathway as far as it goes, it'll at least heal some part of the inner child that is in you. It'll heal whatever it is that's otherwise potentially holding you back. And it's literally blossomed into one of the most beautiful relationships I ever possibly could have.
So you were seeking your father out. You were trying to find him.
It was because that's how it was. That's how it was kind of growing up. Because I'm like, so like, where's dad? Where's dad? Where's dad? But since I always had mom, I didn't really worry about it. But then when I lost mom, and I'm like, okay, it's like I have my siblings, which I will always have, but that's not my parent. I have my grandmother and my grandmother and my grandfather already had my grandfather passed at this point in time. No, my grandfather was also still yet alive. And I had my grandmother and my grandfather and my godparents and my cousins. So I always had a family unit, but it's not my parent. So I spent a lot of years kind of feeling, for lack of better terms, feeling lost in the world for a little bit. Actually, even Dr. Williams, when I met you, I was dealing with a lot of that underlying loss in the world. Something I talked about with my line brother Justin, my best friend. Something I talked about with my other people in Hampton, but not always in the full teasing of those details. But in that moment when I first heard my father's voice, which sounds exactly like mine,
And you look just like them, but you still got to go back into how you found them. But you do look just like them.
So it was literally that. So I was like, I have a name, I have a location, I have where my parents otherwise met, and that is it. But at this point in time, I literally put my law student mind to work and said, well, let's use what we know to identify what we don't know to connect the dots. And in reaching out to my dad first via social media, which it's funny because I had done an ancestry DNA test like a year and a half prior, because I was sitting at an Applebee's having lunch with my law school best friend Irvin, who's still my best friend to this day, one of the closest people that I have to me, someone who's also continued to inspire me to always be myself in my fullness. And I remember we got the ancestry DNA results, blah, blah, blah. And I connected with two close relatives that said a high possibility of a second cousin. I'm like, second cousin?
Yeah.
I'm like, I know who my first and second cousins are because they're close to me. It must be a connection to my dad's side of the family potentially, but I don't know. Lo and behold, those two people were actually my auntie, so my dad's older sister.
Okay.
And then my dad's first cousin.
Wow.
And we didn't connect those dots until after I connected to my dad, and they both went back and said, I saw this message come up and I meant to respond, but I'm not your cousin. But I'm just not your second cousin. I'm your dad's first cousin. I'm not just your cousin. I'm your auntie. Here's the whole family tree. And
they gave you that.
I remember when I first heard my maternal grandmother speaking for the first time, she was like, is this my grandson that I've been praying for all these years? Because this backstory, yes, we thank God for praying grandmothers. Right, I'm opening all this up. So when I was younger, my maternal grandmother, my grandmother Berta, was like, all right, God, look, I know that he's out here somewhere, and if he's good for him, bring him around in your timing. My grandmother Berta then at that point literally saw in her mind the face of a brown-skinned, round-faced woman with short gray hair smiling on the couch. My grandmother Portia, who had lost her youngest son John back in 1998, I believe, she was like, God, I feel like there's still somebody out there that I need to connect to, and I don't know who it is. Bring them in your time. Literally, both of my grandmothers were praying concurrently to bring the families together. And when I tell you that understanding that and developing that relationship with my dad and my little brother and sister, who were just like, so we've got a big brother somewhere? Cool. Where is he? Let's meet him. My grandmother's like, so there's my grandson. Let's meet him. My aunties and my cousins, everyone else. When I say they have embraced me in full in every possible way. And it all goes back to that single decision that I made that day in February of 2018 that says...
When you were recovering.
Yes, when I was recovering. Do I follow the path and see where it goes? And this is now where it's led.
Did your father know about you?
Now that I'm not entirely sure. And because of the fact I'm not entirely sure, I don't want to fully speak upon it. But the fact of the matter is this, it's water under the bridge now. Because in the now, we're good.
Okay. So what has it been like developing a relationship?
So it's been awkward in some spaces because it's like, as we all know, because we've been children, and then we've been adult children, and we understand that being a child in different time frames in life is a little bit more difficult. But as it goes with learning and understanding my father, it's an understanding of grace has to generally just be applied in full. Because without that grace, you then can't really move forward to what that reconciliation looks like. And I mean, isn't that what the model of salvation and grace actually means? Altogether, because I'm a practicing Christian, and it's one of those things where I understand that grace is literally the thing that can connect.
So it's your maturity that allows it to be so. That's for sure. It's a different level of maturity. Even how I asked the question of, did he know? Most people just want to know in general, but you focused on, I don't want to even go backwards. I don't, that has no dealing with where I want to move forward. Like you're really in that part, and you are applying a whole lot of grace and in that regards, a whole lot of grace. And then you're right. You're coming into a relationship where he sees you then as a child. He's trying to get to know you, but you're not really a child. You're like an actual grown man at this this stage, and how do you then reconcile, those years of without him also having to extend some grace, because he's never been able to tell you what to do. So for him, I've never met him. I've just seen pictures of him. So I don't know that he would try to assert that authority, but he doesn't look like a pushover to me. So I can imagine that there'd be times that he would want to tell you what to do, and you have to give pause for a second, like, whoa, wait a minute.
And a lot of that comes with the understanding of, is my dad speaking from a place of authority, or is my dad speaking from a place of a guiding parent? And it's that kind of understanding of where he's speaking from that allows us to be able to otherwise move forward. Because there's sometimes we're having conversations, I'm like, no, dad's got some good wisdom, X, Y, and Z, because ironically, like our lives, like our 20s nearly tracked each other beat for beat. Even down to the point of when we both pledged, we're both quads. During our times in our chapters, we were chapter presidents. We both swam through our younger years. We both did music through our younger years. We're both
Your daddy was a fish too.
And I tell you that learning my father is literally like playing back bits and pieces of my life, because my dad will just be exchanging stories. And he'll be like, yes, he's like, so yes, son, I remember what X, Y, Z happened in college, blah, blah, blah. He'll get to point A, B, and C. And right before he gets to point B, I'm like, let me guess. This is what happened. And he said, how did you know? And I'm like, because I lived the same life, almost beat for beat. So I'm grateful to God for allowing that to be that kind of space that we both occupied independently, because it then helps us be able to understand each other concurrent.
That's amazing. I know sometimes it's not as easy, but one of the things you point out is that you're working on getting to know him in the now and not necessarily digging through a lot of the what happened back then, because the reality is it happened and you're not focused on what happened to you. You know what I mean? You're focusing on where are we going now, and that's important. That's important. And that's how I would say that's how you begin that phase of here. We're going to move forward in a positive light, so that guess what? I can still have my peace, because the past will continue to haunt you if you allow it to.
It can make you angry. That's for sure. That's
like, and I remember like, let me see. I was 25 when I connected with my father. I know that the 21-year-old in me would not have been prepared for it. The 17-year-old in me would not have been prepared. The 14-year-old in me would have not been prepared. The 10-year-old in me would have not been prepared. So it's one of those things where, like, time makes all things well, and all things work together as they should, and they happen as they should in that time. But
what makes you think the 10-year-old would not have been prepared? That's an interesting concept, because you skipped many, many years in between. I can understand why the 21-year-old would not be prepared. What make the 10-year-old?
Because honestly, from like 4 to like 25, there was a lot of different pieces of resentment that I carried. And the reason why I carried is because the fact that it was that space of I don't know. And because I don't know why. And because I don't know why, sometimes I think, like, was it me? Was it my mom? Was it something else? Like, what was the reason? But without having a reason, that's a different kind of hurt. Like, it's one of those things where it's like when you're seeking closure, but you can't find that closure, that hurts.
Yeah. I find that it hurts when I don't know things in general. In knowing hurts too sometimes. The truth is not always comfortable. It's the knowing that hurts, but I get uncomfortable in the unknowing. You are a brave person to be able to move past without knowing. It would be one of my first questions. Like, I wouldn't be able to move forward without knowing. It doesn't mean that I would agree with what the response is, but the person in me I would just want to know, like, what was going on? Like, some parents are struggling during that time frame, like their children within themselves, and not to offer any excuses. I'm like, I just want to know. I was a wide girl. It's not always healthy, but that.
I mean, like, look, also, Dr. Williams, you know this because you've been my professor. You've been my professor directly. Whys and hows are always questions I'm asking, and always how I'm moving forward. Always. So in having to make peace with the fact that I don't know why, but it was the understanding of, in spite of not knowing why, my life is still moving forward. So do I hold myself back without otherwise knowing? Or do I try to diagnose and then treat the symptoms of what the present is, even if I don't know the source? But in that moment when I connected with my dad for the first time, the source at that point in time was irrelevant. It's relevant for the purposes of context, and it's relevant for the purpose of how we got here. But it's not relevant for the purpose of how we continue to move forward. Because it wouldn't be, because as much of a right as I would have to chastise my father, as much room and standing as I would have to have all of the anger and resentment that would have come out of my injured inner child, it then wouldn't have been healthy for the moving forward. It's kind of like one of those things where you have an unexplainable like cut somewhere, like, and it could have come from anywhere. You're like, okay, because I grew up in the woods, so I always had like random cuts and scrapes from different places. I'm like, was this from my bike? Was this from me running through the woods over here somewhere? Did I scratch myself too hard? Was I ashy? Like, was I ashy in my skin otherwise cracked, or was it from something else? I don't know. But what we do see is that there is the wound. And the only thing that you then can do is to treat the wound, even if you don't know the source. And eventually, the source will reveal itself if it's necessary for you to know. And in spending this time,
you trusted God that you would get what you needed in that regards when you needed it.
Because why would I not ask the one who knows all things, what do I do?
Yeah. And that's just trusting God's timing, in terms of when you found out and everything, and being obedient to what God's will is, and that's the reality of it all. But the other piece of it is from a psychological perspective, developmental perspective, you were at an age where you could really look at this through fully developed cognitive eyes. And that really makes a big difference in terms of being able to process certain things and how you manage that. But then also hearing your discussion on your faith as well. Like I said, you accepted God's will, you've accepted God's timing, and that makes a huge difference. It really does make a huge difference. Now, in terms of the family component with your siblings and all, how is that in terms of, with your siblings accepting the fact, with your dad and everything or whatever, how does that go? Because I know sometimes family dynamics can shift the atmosphere.
Like, as I take a sip.
So dad's side of the family, I'm new. So it's really a matter of we know this person in a sense because he's one of us.
And you look just like your dad.
Look, so when I was back at home,
he couldn't even deny you if he wanted to. It wouldn't even make any sense. You literally are a spitting image.
and that's literally what every single family member of mine said. I remember when I was home in Pennsylvania just a couple weeks ago, because I spent a Christmas with my grandparents, because I hadn't seen them since the great before, otherwise pre-COVID. And I'm sitting there, and I was hanging out with my cousins, so they were just like this. It's so crazy, like, seeing you sit here, and we're kikiing right about now, because, like, when we see you, like, we know that is Demarius, but we see George. And it's a matter of, like, fitting right into there. But my mom's side of the family, there was a lot of conversations that we had to have about, this is my choice. Because for them, it's like, while it directly did not happen to them, they were impacted because they saw what I had to walk through. My grandmother specifically had to see what I had to walk through, what my mother had to walk through, and then what that then looked like for the rest of us. But the conversation I had to have with them was, I'm like, look, this is a choice that I'm making. This is what I want, and it doesn't change my posture and my placement with you all, ever. So the only thing is that I ask is that as I'm also moving with grace, that you move with the same grace. And honestly, it took them some time.
I can imagine. They were used to being your end all and be all. You had a very close niche family.
And we talk to each other almost, like, when I say no, we do talk to each other every day. The group chat just be going off. But, like, I remember, like, when my dad came for my graduation, because he was like, I'm not missing any other major thing that you have going on moving forward. And he's like, I understand. He literally said, he's like, I understand the circumstances are what they were. And that doesn't change what was. But what is and what will be is better action from me. It'll be presence from me, and it'll be a development between the two of us. But literally, he pulled up to my grandmother's house for my graduation party. My dad and I were chilling because we had already built that kind of rapport. My grandmother was sitting here like this. Both my sisters were posted up at the door.
They were ready on site.
Because it was gonna be on site, because just like I don't play about them, but
they don't play about you. Yeah.
Look, my sisters do not play about their brother. My grandmother does not pray about her grandson at all.
Period.
But during that time, they got the chance to see how we otherwise interacted and otherwise getting to know him. And then even now, as I'm still getting to know him, and as they're still getting to know him, both like as they see their own observations, as well as how they see how I navigate through the relationship and different things that I share with them, it's giving them the opportunity to also be able to afford similar kinds of grace, even if it's just for my sake and my sake alone. And for me, that's enough.
That's enough.
Because I'm like, look, like y'all can feel what you feel, and you have complete and total grounds to do so because you understand what it is that I otherwise went through.
They love you, and you know it's from love. Yeah.
And that's really what it is, because the fact that I know it's coming from love can cover a multitude.
A multitude of sins.
Love can cover a multitude of sins. Love can cover a multitude of missteps. Love covers all. Look, y'all know what it says. Y'all know what it says in 1 Corinthians.
It bears all things, hopes all things, endures all things. And we know about love. We know about love.
Word of God for the people of God.
But I like that. I appreciate your honesty and your vulnerability, and your emotional maturity, and that is also inspiring. And I think that will inspire a lot of younger men too, because we don't often get to have the conversations about men tapping into their emotions or being expressive or having that level of emotional intelligence, where you had more emotional intelligence than most seasoned adults would have had in that type of situation. Yeah, so definitely inspiring for the people out there.
It is funny how you mentioned the inspiring part, because I remember like after my dad and I met for the first time and I made that post, I literally got to class like that afternoon because I took off the morning to go meet my dad and everything else. I got to school and literally the whole law school said, stop, sit down and explain this. Because what do you mean? And there was those who were like on ground zero, whether it's like I said, my best friend Irvin. I don't know if you met her, but Meredith Barnett. What is her married name now? I forgot what her married last name is, but she was actually at ground zero when a lot of this was happening, and was a very strong support system, as was a lot of the other Black law students. Then there were those who literally had no idea, and the whole time they're just like, so how did this happen? How did you get here? And how do you navigate it? And just like I explained it to them, just like I explained it to you all. And they literally said, that is one of the most inspiring stories that I've ever heard. And I'm glad that I got to witness it for myself. And it subsequently also helped a lot of my other friends and peers and colleagues start to heal and mend relationships with their own family members. So of course, I'm reminded of the second part of the verse, because the first part of the verse says we overcome by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of our testimony. And being a lawyer, we understand that when you testify as something that you are testifying to truthfully, that you know about, and what you're otherwise trying to say what it is, to help someone else figure out what the truth is. Because if you're otherwise testifying, you're trying to testify for the fact finder to figure out what it is exactly happened. And in my case, that being a crucial part of my testimony allows other people to figure out then what their own testimonies are. His testimonies are personal. None of us has, even if we lived the exact same circumstance at the exact same point in time, how we otherwise see it is still going to be different.
Based on your perception. Absolutely.
Based on your perception and based on who you are, but it's also that kind of deposit that you get from God that says, hey, here's what your story is. And since this is your story and this is how you then overcome, you then share your story with other people, and that's then how it inspires. I actually remember
that's not the only inspiring story that you have shared on social media. Like, and being more honest about your truth and understanding those truths. You've covered a multitude of different areas, you know, and when you made that post, I have to admit, I don't cry over a lot of things, but I cried that day. I really felt that one personally because, you know, after I know people would not believe it. I actually cried. But
I'm just sitting here in awe, like, okay,
right.
You're
like, my sister has emotions. I was snot nose crying too. Let me tell you, because I snot nose crying. It was so much joy in that video. It was like disgusting levels of joy that you had. You had no humanity if you could not cry in this video. And the fact that I knew his personal story about, you know, losing his mother and, you know, all the other stuff, and to not have his father, and then to find his father and to look just like this man and to be received. And, you know, all of that was a part of the story. You could see his father was genuinely happy to see him and celebrating him. And so that thing got me for real. So I can imagine that it opened up, it triggered probably quite a few people and motivated them in different ways. But you have the ability to do that. Like you, with your truth and your transparency, everybody is not comfortable living their truth. But I have watched you over the years become more and more comfortable. I found out more and more things about you after you left Hampton, after you left your home by the sea, that you've just become more of yourself.
It's something about learning what authenticity looks like,
and what it feels like. It's amazing,
and what it feels like, and just what it is like. And again, being a lawyer, we talk about authentication of evidence and laying the proper foundation. And it's basically, and the whole thing about authenticity is that we're saying the thing is what it purports to be. And even as I've grown and as I've developed, like, I've never otherwise felt inauthentic, but I've always dived into a deeper level of what that authenticity is. And a lot of that really comes with an understanding of just being vulnerable and not just being honest with what things are, but literally just looking yourself in the mirror and stripping away your own mask. Because a lot of times we have to then convince ourselves who it is that we are. And whatever mask.
That's some serious self-talk that we have to do in that. Yes, indeed.
Okay. Like, I remember, what was it? This is maybe like, I want to say this was like 2L spring or like 3L fall, like 2017, somewhere in that time frame. I remember I was hanging out with some friends of mine. Simple. I just ran to the bathroom right quick, and I saw that they had these different affirmations written on the mirror. And as I'm reading their affirmations, I'm like, why do you have these written here? And they said, it's because every single morning when I get up to brush my teeth and wash my face and take a shower, those are some of the first words that I see. And when I read them, I repeat them to myself until I otherwise internalize them. I took that a step further. And in that same year, I said, you know what? Every single time I see my reflection, I'm going to say something good about myself that I see. Whether it is something as simple as, you know what? Your haircut looks good today, bro. Your barber did a great job, but you are wearing this haircut. Or it's like, you know what? You have a nice outfit. Or I like how you didn't pop off on nobody yesterday, but you still stood your ground. I like how you are growing into this different person. I'm glad that you are all these different things. Like, I always began to tell myself whenever I saw my reflection, whether it's in my mirror, whether it's like I'm walking past a set of windows, if I'm looking into the water, if I'm taking a selfie on my phone, it's a regular practice of mine that I began to put in practice then almost. You see, I can do math. No, I can't. I went to law school. 8 years? Yeah, about 8 years. about for the past 7 or 8 years. And it's really made a huge difference in allowing me to find what my authenticity is. Because, of course, y'all been to Hampton. Dr. Mason, you went to Hampton. You get it. Yeah. There's times when you're trying to otherwise develop yourself into something that you may not otherwise be.
Right.
But I remember I had a different conversation with my big sister, Katisha Mallard, who's now down, I believe, at Florida A&M. So she was a junior. So she was a junior when I got to Hampton. I was a freshman. We had both gotten there for band camp. And I remember when I got there, I'm like, okay, So Demarius, you grew up with the white people all your days, and not navigating these black spaces. You dropped yourself right here in the middle of an HBCU on your own. Who are you going to be? So I remember. I'm like, okay, let me just at least remember the basics. My first name. And another reason why I'm so adamant about my first name, because like one, people been calling me either Demarius, Demetrius, Demarcus, Dimitri, Darmius, whatever else it may be, or otherwise just ignoring the 8 letters in the front of my name. But when I got to Hampton, I'm like, you know what? That's not something I want to deal with. Let me pick a nickname that's going to work for me. So I remember we're waiting in line right there at the old calf, the big calf. Shout out to the big calf before I found out what the small calf was. And I remember she came up and she was like, y'all are freshmen. Who are you? Because I don't know who you are. And we're all going through introducing ourselves one by one. I introduced myself by my nickname. I'm like, it's like I'm Demar. You just call me Demar. She said, that's not your name. What is it? And I was taken aback. I said, first of all, who is this telling me who I can introduce myself as? And I was like, I bashfully said, I'm like, Demarius. And I tell TT this all the time. And I thank her for this. She's like, so if that was your first name, why didn't you introduce yourself as such? And I'm like, people always get my first name wrong. It's something I didn't otherwise want to deal with. I didn't want to deal with it here at Hampton. She said, first of all, my first name is Katitra. And while everybody otherwise calls me TT, my first name is Katitra, and that's the first thing that you will otherwise get correct before you call me anything else. So she said, don't you ever let anybody else call you something different, and don't you ever be ashamed of your own first name. That struck with me. That was now going on 13 and a half years ago, and I still remember that conversation right there on the steps. So TT, if you're listening, again, I thank you. Because
that was one of my students. That she's one of my babies, and she and her bold self, I love her.
It is that kind of boldness that I learned from her that I then was able to then walk into during those 4 years at Hampton, during those 3 years at Emory, and now during these. Okay, again, we can do math, but not really, because I went to law school over these past 6.5 years, otherwise being in practice. And it's something that I remember every single day when I get up, every single day when I walk into court, every single day when an attorney tries me, because they do. Every single day.
That's their job.
Right.
No, their job is to try cases. Not
right?
me.
I know that's right. And try Jesus. And now you
right. Try Jesus.
Because taste and see that the Lord is good, but you know what? Just because I'm Christian, I mean I'm sweet. Simon Peter is my discipleship model. I love the Lord with all of my being, and I try my best, but I will get with you if I must.
Please let everybody keep their ears so they may hear. And listen out there, because he really meant that. He really truly meant that. But I appreciate you talking about that self-talk, and that is something that shifted my life too. When the world is very loud, and I like things to be quiet at times. And so I get up before everybody else does, even in my house, so that I can hear myself and who I want to listen to before I listen to the world. And I say things to myself that I will never repeat to anybody else, because it's not their business, because I'm talking to myself. But I say things to myself before anybody else can say anything else to me. And I noticed that changed my whole life. It changed my whole perspective of how I show up. And I get to choose then how I show up my best self, because I talk myself through that before anybody else says anything. And it could be something simple like, they're going to try you today, because that you already know what's going to happen today, but not today. Not today. You will not be responding today. This is how you will maneuver this. This is how you will shift this, and you will carry on about your day. Tomorrow will come right on around like every other day.
But it's one of those things where it becomes hard, because then you'll get to a space where you've had all that self-talk and you've been able to build yourself up, and you have your community, your in-group. Let me see if I remember some of my psychology terminology.
There you go. You're doing good.
I mean, the reason why I went to be a psych major in the first place, to understand how people respond to things, and then how they move through those things. And in my case specifically, how do people respond to crime? How do people respond to the law? How do people respond to the system? And then how then do I navigate it? But when you take that time to build yourself with your in-group, then sometimes you have to remember that your out-group is not going to accept you sometimes. Your out-group is going to try to tell you things. And I know that, especially not in this past year, because I thank God for my work environment that I have now. But in the previous years, I had to deal with situations where it's like I've had lawyers try to tell me otherwise who I was. I've had judges try to tell me who I was. I've had coworkers within my own office try to tell me who I was. I've had supervisors try to tell me who I was and who I otherwise could not be. And a lot of that was very, very, very discouraging. But I remember, again, I thank God for my grandma. My grandma and I be having those, we have those good old Grandma Tala and Moana moments. For the Disney fans amongst us, we're out here on the boat in the dark sea when Grandma Tala came in with as a stingray, where Grandma Tala had to be like, "It's Moana, who are you?" And you must remember who you are. And those are conversations that I've had to have with my grandmother regularly, because there's been different situations where people have been trying to tell me different things, and then I began to internalize it. And I remember one of these last conversations I had with my grandmother, who was on her sick bed of all things, because my grandmother had some significant medical issues last year. From her sick bed, rising up like, "Demarius, don't you internalize any of that, because you know who you are. But if you
remember who you are."
That's right. Wakanda,
and then we can go all the way to Wakanda and say, show them who you are.
That's honestly what my grandmother had to tell me and had to remind me, because at the time I was dealing with a lot of different struggles professionally. I will say some things were of my own doing. I can concede to that because I'm strong enough and I'm honest enough to admit it. A lot of it was not. And that's also just what the honest truth is. But because of the fact that I began you know what? I'm going to go ahead and say,
because your petty is petty. I already know.
But it was one of those things where I had to navigate through difficult situations that I could not speak on. And Dr. Williams, you know me.
Silence.
If there is something that I'm dealing with, it is some shit that I don't like. Yes, I'm just going to go ahead and use my language as it is. I'm going to talk about it. And this was one of those situations where I could not speak on it and literally had to sit in the silence and wait on God to move. But even in that sitting in the silence, it became the internalization of, well, what about this? And can I do this? And can I do this? And I can't move this way. And my grandmother said, every single time that somebody tries to tell you something that you can't do, or someone tries to tell you that you are not good enough, you revert back to that small child I remember trying to navigate his way through the world. Don't you dare internalize that. Like I said, my grandma said it this way. She said, run the vacuum cleaner over that mess and move on. And it was in that moment where I was like, you know what? Yeah. How y'all gonna tell me how to otherwise move? And how y'all gonna tell me who I am when I know me? And on top of that, I know me, I know God who knows me in full.
That's right.
And show them who you are.
And
you can show them better than you can tell them.
And stand on business.
You can show them way better than you can tell them. And, there's things that once you've shown people, you don't need words.
Not at all. Like it or leave it. That's it.
No, don't tell.
Right.
And I like to tell people that, no is a complete sentence. And that period is not a comma. And it doesn't require explanation or anything. It's a full, complete sentence. No.
Exactly. They may not get it. They may not understand. But the question is, it ain't for you. If that's the case.
And you don't have to explain yourself. But that comes with more emotional maturity when you realize that you don't have to be for other people what they want you to be. That's not your responsibility. That's not what you signed up to be, what you want them to be. Just because you can does not mean that you should. You can be all of those things, but that doesn't mean that that's what you should be. And you have to be because they asked you to or told you to. And so it comes, but it's also learning who to say no to and who you can say no to. And so I think that's the part of maturing too, is learning when to be silent and when to let your work just speak for you versus using your words. And so let the work I've done speak for me. That's just the way I look at it. Yeah.
And it's funny how you talk about telling no, because I remember even going through law school. And again, I've always been a high achieving student. I've always generally been a good student and everything else. And I remember having to navigate that way through law school, having to deal with a lot of no's, having to deal with a lot of disappointments. But I had to remember, wait a minute, the only person who can tell me no is God, first and foremost. Meaning I have to internalize what it is that it's don't let anybody tell you no, including yourself. And that was an ethic that I had preached to other people, but it wasn't one that I was fully working out on my own until I got into that space. But it was honestly, once I got to that space of I'm not going to let anybody dictate who it is that I am to be, is really then when I began to step into my fullness. And then understanding the stepping into my fullness, and then was like, okay, cool. Here's what my authentic self looks like, all bright and colorful as it is. This light is not
all the many colors. All the many colors.
And this light is not going to be under a bushel. You can either glow, you can catch a tan, or you can burn. The choice is on you.
Catch on fire. I'm saying. hey.
The burn part.
Yeah, I understood what he was saying. Hey.
Grow, glow,
and that in itself is all about perception too. And that those are the choices that people have. Once you have presented yourself, that is the choice that they have. But your choice and your only choice is to show them who you are, and to be you. That's it.
And those who will receive you will.
Those will be your Facebook.
And let's go back to the scripture. Like when Jesus was sending out the disciples, he said very, very clearly, to every place that you go and every home that you enter, you bring your peace with you. And for every place that receives you, let your peace remain. But for every place that does not, you keep your peace there. And when you leave, you take it with you. And when it is time to go, you kick the dust off your feet and you move
dust off your feet.
Exactly.
I'm backwards. Sometimes I'm already dusting my feet, never even approaching the door.
Because you always know when you're not supposed to stay in the place long. You always know. That's a different conversation by itself.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. And we have reached that point to the end of this conversation. But only this one, because there is so much more to discuss, for sure.
We would definitely have to have you back on the show again.
Oh, bring me. I'll have more wine.
I cannot wait. I cannot wait to see all the amazing things that you continue to accomplish in the ways that you continue to show up authentically as yourself in life, and encouraging other people to do the same thing, because there's enough space out there for everybody.
Plenty of good room.
Definitely so. Well, listen, we're going to wrap this thing up here at the table. It's been amazing. I've enjoyed myself and enjoyed this conversation, and I know that our listeners have. So we're going to invite everyone to join us right back here next week. I am Dr. Richard Mason.
I'm Dr. Tamara Williams.
And we'll be right back here on
Esquire.
Oh, that's right. Tell them who you are.
I mean, hey, where's my sign off?
There you go.
We'll be right back here on WHOV 88.1 FM.
The essence of HU.
Keep your form.
Someday we'll be able to measure the power of words. I think they are things. I think they get on the walls. They get in your wallpaper. They get in your rugs, in your upholstery, in your clothes, and finally into you.
Thank you for joining us at the table.
Tune in next Sunday at 1 p.m. for more delicious topical recipes for life on the Sunday Brunch.
On Smooth 88.1 WHOV.